Welcome to this session on upgrading to Filr 4. My name's Robin Redgrave. I'm a Senior Solutions Consultant based in the UK. And I'm just going to take you through upgrading from Filr 3.x to Filr 4. So first things first, before you start doing the upgrade, I'd strongly recommend that you read the documentation. And it's this installation, deployment and upgrade guide that I would recommend that you have a look at. That will give you a bit of background behind the upgrade and what needs to be done. You also need to ensure that your existing 3.x appliances are patched to the latest level. About 40% of users out there are still running 3.0 and they've missed out on all the updates to 3.1, 3.2 all the way through to the current version, which is 3.4.3, and of course security updates and so on. I would strongly recommend that in the future with 4 you ensure that you set up the online updates, so as new versions come out you get those coming down. But something you need to do with your existing 3 appliances is bring them up to the latest level. So the way you do that, and we'll actually cover this a little bit more detail later on, is if you log into the virtual appliance administration, let's just log in here as VA admin. I've got this option here for online update, which in this case I've configured, and you've got an option to configure that to go against the online update center, Novell Customer Center, and it will prompt you for an activation key. Just so you're aware where you get that key from, if you log into your customer center, click on software and then on purchased or entitled software that you'll have here, find the Novell Filr option, and if you just click on keys, that will give you not just the license key for Filr but also the activation key for the online update, which is a string of numbers that and letters that you need to put in there. Let's just go and apply those patches while I'm here. So we'll just do an update now. I'm going to do those 2. The important one here is, especially if you're running a single server deployment, is this one here, which has a pre-upgrade script that you need to run on a single server install. Obviously, if you haven't applied patches in the past, you're going to see a lot more patches here than just those 2 that I've got. So let's just apply those, and while that's going on, let's go through a little bit more here. By the way, you can also go against an SMT server if you're pulling patches down centrally and then distributing them from there. If you've already applied some online updates, it may be that you won't see that last patch with the update script. That's because we changed the security key on the update channel, so you need to apply an FTF to the system to get that new security key in, and then you'll see those update patches in the listing there. If you've never patched a 3.0 appliance and this is new, you won't need to apply this patch because you'll just pick up the new security key automatically there. Something else we need to do, especially from the disks, is remove any snapshots. As part of the upgrade process, we're going to be taking the data disk from the 3.0 appliance and moving that across to our new 4 appliance. If you're using snapshots, then obviously the 4 appliance doesn't know about those snapshots, so remove any snapshots. Or what you can do, actually, there's an application called VMKFS Tools that you can run that will take a snapshotted disk and make a unsnapshotted disk out of it, which you can use as well should you wish to. Make sure that you've backed up your existing appliances. What we're going to do is non-invasive and you can continue running them as they are, but just to be on the safe side, I always do a backup. Download the new Filr 4 appliances. You can get those from the customer center and download those. So in this case, what we're talking about, by the way, is just the web appliance and the search appliance. The database appliance, there's something slightly different there, because in version 4 we've changed the default database from MySQL to Postgres. We'll still support MySQL and indeed MS SQL and Maria, but the one that we ship with is going to be Postgres, and the appliance is going to be Postgres. So there's some extra bits and pieces we need to do with that, but we'll cover that towards the end of the session here. But download your Filr 4 web and search appliances here and deploy them just as you did in the Filr 3 appliances. Go and adjust the memory and processors as required. Make sure they're on the correct network. Something to bear in mind here when you come to go and deploy the appliances is that the default memory of the web appliance has changed to be 16 gig rather than the 8 gig that we had before. So just be aware of that. There's some implications later on in the upgrade because of that. And the main reason that we've got an additional memory requirement is that we're now running on SLES 12. Many things on the back end have been updated and changed, and indeed those have brought in better performance for the Filr system, but one of the requirements is to run on 16 gig of memory. Obviously you can, depending on number of users and performance, you can expand that up to whatever memory you need. So let's just talk about doing a small deployment upgrade. Now, despite recommendations to the contrary that it's better running a large clustered install which gives you scalability and high availability, about 80% of you out there are running Filr in a single server deployment. Just so you're aware, there are processes that you can run to move from a small deployment to a large clustered deployment should you wish to. What we'll go through here is the small deployment first, then we'll look at how the large deployment is done, and we'll do a live upgrade with this going through there. So first of all, we've got a migration script that we need to run, and this only needs to be run for a small deployment, the single server deployment. If you're in a large clustered deployment, you don't actually need to run this script. Having done that, we need to power down the appliance and then copy the data disk across to the new appliance that we're going to be set up. And finally, we need to create a new logging disk. Don't take the existing logging disk across, that can cause issues, and make sure that you add the logging disk after you've added the data disk, because they need to go in the right order to be picked up correctly there. So let's just run that pre-migration script. Let's come in here and log in. And we've got, let's just change directory into the directory we want, which is in Filr underscore upgrade, and then there's a script here called preupgrade.sh. It's going to ask me here for the Filr user password that I originally set up. If you've forgotten that password, and some users have come back to me saying they've forgotten it, don't worry. There is a way of running MySQL in a safe mode that lets you reset that. If you just look up on the web, you'll find instructions on how to change that password. It's something you need to do from the console here. So in this case, I'll know the password. It's then going to check the amount of disk space. I do need to have about double the amount of disk space for the database that I'm using at the moment, because we're going to take a copy of that database. If you haven't got enough space on the disk and it checks here for you, don't worry. If you expand the disk in the hypervisor using the hypervisor tools, and then you can expand the partition by going into the VA admin, the 9443 console, and on there's an option to expand the partition. So don't worry if this says you haven't got enough disk space, you can expand the disk to get you that. In this case, I'm going to continue. So we're going to stop the Filr service, and that's going to take that down and continue with that. So that's now successfully run. Let's shut down the server, and then, having shut down the server, we're going to take that data disk across and add that to our new appliance that we've downloaded. So let's just wait a moment for that to shut down properly. And there we go. So if I come and look in here in my Filr 3, that's my data disk here, the disk 2. So I'm just going to copy that and add that to my new appliance that I downloaded. And then I will bring up my new Filr 4. But before I do that, I just need to check the memory, which, as I said, is at 16. I'm on the right network, change the number of processors, and add those additional disks. So if I just add a disk here, hard disk, it's going to be SCSI. I'm going to use an existing disk, and it's going to be that disk 2 that we had. The documentation recommends that you make this independent so it doesn't get affected by snapshots. Personally, I prefer to be able to do snapshots, so I don't check that. But the reason for that is that when you're doing an upgrade, you need to get rid of those snapshots. So just be aware of that. Let's just finish that. And then I can add in a new disk for the logging disk. So let's just store that as a single file, and we'll call that disk 3. And having done that, we're just going to power on that virtual machine. So this is going to power up. So that may take a moment or two. So let's go through a little bit more here. So make sure you don't power up the old appliance that you've got, and indeed, as I said, what we've done isn't invasive at all, so if you needed to do a rollback, you could. But the reason we don't want it coming up is because the new appliance is going to come up on exactly the same IP address as before, so your DNS entries are still going to find it, and so on. Once it's gone through the initial boot, it's going to prompt us the first time for the virtual appliance administration and the root password. These aren't the existing ones. This is just giving us an opportunity to change the passwords should we wish to. Normally I tend to go and set them exactly the same as I used to have, otherwise I'm going to start typing in the wrong password and get locked out there. So there we are, there it is asking for our passwords. Let's just type those in. And click OK. Now the upgrade here is going to take a while. This depends on the size of the database that you've got. I've got some figures at the end of the presentation which will give you a rough idea of how long it might take for this upgrade to take place. What we'll do is just jump ahead. Okay, so that update is finished. Let's just log in, and there are a few things that we need to do now that the update is completed. We need to log into the virtual appliance administration and set up that online update. As I said, 40% of you have not done that, and you have missed out on all the extra features we've had in multiple, 4 different versions of Filr since the initial appliance came out, and you really must do that. I'll show you how to do it in a moment. What we also need to do is just go in and change the JVM memory. Because the RAM has changed up to 16 gigabytes, we need to change that Java memory to be about 60% of the total. So if you're going to be running with 16 gigabytes, then make it about 9 gigabytes of memory. And also we need to apply the Filr 4 license. So download that from the customer center and apply it. The appliance that you've downloaded has a default of a 60-day evaluation key, but that is from when Filr was first installed. So unless you've installed Filr in the past couple of months, you're going to start getting errors as soon as you log in there. And having made those changes, we obviously need to do a reconfigure of Filr. So let's just go in and change those bits and pieces. So let's just log into the VA admin. So here, VA admin. So on the online update, as soon as I go in there, it's going to prompt me for how I want to do this against the local SMT server or the customer center. Most of the time you're going to be going against the customer center, so just put your email in there and then your activation key you got from the customer center in there and say register. As easy as that. And then when you come in, you're going to see that big red exclamation mark next to online updates if there's anything that needs to be applied. So then just obviously go in and apply it. But let's just go and change our configuration here. One thing we want to do is change that JVM settings, because previously it was set at 4 gig on the old server. This time round we're going to change that to about 9 gig, 60% of the total there, and make them both the same. The reason for that is because if you've when it applies memory, it can take up quite a bit of processing to do that. So if they're both the same, it doesn't have to go through that. And we need to apply our license file. So you can see here we've got our 60-day eval, but this Filr server has been running for many years, so that won't work. So I'll need to have my license there that again you've downloaded from the customer center. If I just say OK to that and then do a reconfigure Filr server, that will go through and configure that for us. So some other things that you need to bear in mind after doing the update. You may find that you need to clear your cache. There may be graphics and other things that are cached that you need to clear from the cache. Something that is important is that you need to do a full reindex of the system, and if you're running in a multi-zoned environment, you're going to need to do this for each zone that you've got as well. And this is what takes time during the upgrade, is the full reindex. And again, I've got some figures at the end that will give you a rough idea of how long it's going to take to do that. There's a database backup that you may want to remove, and that will just give you a little bit of extra space. And also bear in mind that if you've made changes to SSF properties or maybe smb.conf, you will need to reapply those onto the Filr 4 environment. However, if you've made changes to the SSF ext properties file, then they should be taken over as part of the upgrade. So always, if you're making changes to the properties file, do it to the ext version rather than the other one, which does get overwritten sometimes during patching and upgrade. So let's just go through and log in and do that reindex. So let's just log in here as admin. And when you log in, you'll find that you won't have any files there. If I go to the administration console and look at users, for instance, I've got no users in there. This is because I haven't got an index yet on the system. So to reindex, just go into search index, go and say reindex everything and say OK. And this, as I said, is what's going to take a lot of time. In my system, I've only got a couple of thousand files, so it's not going to take too long there. So now if I go and look at users, we'll see all my users there. If I go to my files, I've got a few files there and so on. So that's up and running quite happily. So let's just talk about upgrading the large deployment upgrade here. We talked about downloading the search and the web appliances and importing those into your environment. So we need to do almost exactly the same as we did with the single server there. We need to take that data disk across, that disk 2, and add it to the new appliance. We then need to add a new log disk for that. By the way, what you can do is, if you're concerned about getting disks in the right order, just set up a different SCSI controller for each. So SCSI 0 for the OS disk, 1 for VA storage, and 2 for VAR, and just go into the advanced administration on your hypervisor to set that up. Then you'll get them around the right way. But by default, if you add them, if you add the VA storage before you add the VAR disk, it will get it in the right order. Then power up the new appliances, and you're going to get prompted for those passwords, which put them in, and that will then run through and do the upgrade, and just wait till the prompt appears. Then you just need to do exactly the same as we did before. So set up the online updates, go and modify the JVM on the web appliances, install Filr 4 license, and remember you need to do that JVM and Filr 4 license for each web appliance, not just one, because those are appliance settings. You'd need to do that for each web appliance that you've got in place there. If you're using the MySQL appliance, we can continue running MySQL. You don't have to do an update of that immediately if you don't want. You can pace yourself and do that another weekend, for instance, should you wish to, so you're not offline during work hours. We'll still support MySQL, we'll still support MS SQL and Maria. The only thing is, if you're using the database appliance, obviously you're not going to get any additional security patches or updates coming down on that. But if you do want to migrate to the new appliance, we'll cover that in a moment. Again, you need to do a full reindex of the system, and of course each zone if you're in a multi-zone environment, and reapply any changes that you've done. So how do we migrate that database if we wanted to? And this, as I said, is only if you're running the existing MySQL database appliance there. If you're running against your in-house MS SQL, you don't need to worry about any of this, and you don't need to actually do this initially. As I said, if you're running the MySQL appliance, that's will work quite happily with 4. So to migrate that, we need to deploy the Postgres appliance in exactly the same way as we deploy other appliances. So go and change memory, add the VA storage, the VAR, set up the network, power it up. But then we need to create a role, or a user effectively, for the Postgres SQL that Filr can use, which is exactly the same as we did with the MySQL database originally, if you remember that far back. But because we don't want to, when we're doing this migration, we don't want people still updating the database. Obviously we need to stop Filr on all the web nodes that we've got, so people can't come in and do stuff. You can do this by either through the system services, or just run rc Filr stop at the console. Then log in to Filr on the 9443 port on just one of the Filr web nodes. Go into the Filr configuration database, select the option to do a database migration, enter your Postgres details there, and say OK, and that will start the migration. While it's migrating the database, make sure there's no interruption to the connection between the two database servers, the old MySQL one and the new Postgres one, and don't refresh the browser. Leave the browser running there. And finally, you need to go in and reconfigure the Filr appliance that you've got there. Once the migration is complete, power down the MySQL appliance, and what I tend to do is just go in, hit the web node that we've got there, and just confirm that Filr actually is working fine. Once you've confirmed that, log into VA admin on each of the other web nodes that you've got and go into the Filr configuration database. Just change it to be Postgres and do a reconfigure there, just so it's changing the database over to a Postgres database, and then everything will be configured there. Let's just go and have a look at the video I've got of that happening. Here you can see we're logging into the new database appliance, the Postgres appliance. Go into configure Postgres. First thing we do when going in, it's going to prompt us for a master password. So this is for the Postgres user. So that will go there. We then log in as that user using the credentials that we set. So Postgres is the username and the password we set. We then need to configure a role. So this is going to be a role that we're going to call Filr. We'll configure the password for that, and then we need to give it a couple of rights there. So we need to let it to be able to create a database and to log in. And if we create that, you can see we've now got that role there. If we now need to go in and stop the web services for each web node, so in this case we're just going into the system services and then doing a stop on the Filr web service, and we need to do this for each web appliance that we've got. And then we need to go in and configure the database migration. So we check the box that says migrate the database, put in the host address of the new server. We can't use the same IP address as the old database server because that's still running at the same time that we've got here. Put in the username and the password that we configured before and just say OK. That's going to now do the migration. We don't want to interrupt that in any way, so leave that running. Don't worry, it's not going to time out. Once the migration is complete, it's going to prompt us to do a reconfigure because we need to write down those database settings to Filr to pick up. What we then need to do is now just go into each of the other web appliances, change the database type to be Postgres, put in the new IP address of the Postgres server, and put in the username and the password, and then we're going to say reconfigure. Having done that, what we need to do next is just go in and take down the old MySQL appliance because we don't need to be running that anymore, and just do a shutdown, and that can remain turned off for a while until you're happy the new database is working, and then you can delete it and clear up the space there. So last of all, here I just want to go through some timings with you. So just to give you a rough idea of how long it's going to take. And these, by the way, seem to be a little bit longer than people are seeing in the field. If we take someone who's got about 1.5 million files, then the database migration time is taking about 26 minutes, and the reindex, where they haven't got full text indexing, is taking about 45 minutes there. So you can see, you know, on a small install with about 1 million files, 1.5 million files, it's going to be upgraded in an hour or so there. With more files, 5 million files, we're looking here at the database migration of being a bit over 2 hours, and that's with no content indexing. But if you do have full text indexing, you can see here we've only got 1 million files, but full content indexing, that's taking about 4 hours. So it does make a big difference if you've got content indexing enabled. If you've got a large deployment, large cluster deployment, then obviously you're most probably dealing with far more files than the small deployment, so things are going to take quite a bit longer. So here with 30 million files, we're looking at about 2 days to do that reindexing, and just be aware of how long it's going to take. So thank you very much. Hopefully this has given you an idea of how to do the Filr 4 upgrade. Thank you very much for your